The cameras flashed. The studio audience roared with laughter. But, behind the bright lights and that iconic wooden bar, Hollywood's favorite leading man was silently drowning in a spiral of self-doubt.
He was terrified, honestly, just waiting for impending disaster.
Exactly. And just like that, Hollywood had a new obsession, but the reality behind the scenes was a total mess. Welcome to Starscope Report.
Join us as we uncover Hollywood drama, music industry shakeups, and viral influencer scandals.
From red carpet surprises to social media controversies, we dive deep into the stories behind the fame. Today, we're opening up a stack of recent retrospectives and oral histories to pull back the curtain on a sitcom legend.
All right, we're talking about Ted Danson, and it is quite the psychological profile today.
It really is. The mission for this deep dive is to look way past the glossy, award-winning facade of Cheers. We want to understand how Danson navigated a profound imposter syndrome, a 30-year feud, reckless escapism, and a scandal that nearly erased his career.
Because the truth is, the gap between a public performance and a private reality is often incredibly wide.
Yeah, and for you listening, consider this the ultimate look at the chaotic reality behind someone who outwardly appears to have everything completely figured out.
Danson's story is basically a masterclass in how that gap can swallow a person whole if they aren't careful.
So let's unpack that gap right from the beginning, because the start of Cheers was, well, a lot less cheerful than the title suggests.
That's an understatement.
Right. I mean, everyone knows Sam Malone. He's the suave, arrogant, womanizing bartender who owns every room he walks into. But after filming the very first pilot episode, Ted Danson literally hid behind the drapes on set and just broke down in tears.
Which is wild.
I read this and I couldn't process it. How does a guy who plays the most self-assured character on television not even know how to fake it behind the scenes?
Well, it's fascinating because of the sheer level of cognitive dissonance he was experiencing. He felt completely untethered playing Sam Malone because, by his own admission, he just wasn't a womanizer.
He didn't even understand the mechanics of arrogance.
Exactly. He actually confessed recently that women had to be standing opposite him, like completely naked, for him to even realize they were interested.
Which is the exact opposite of the character. Sam Malone can read a room in 3 seconds flat.
Right, so Danson is just spiraling.
So he pulls the director, Jimmy Burrows, aside, goes behind the curtains, and confesses, "I'm really bad. I'm awful. I don't know what to do."
And Jimmy Burrows' reaction is just...
He just laughs in his face and walks away. I mean, that seems incredibly cruel for someone having a literal panic attack.
It sounds super harsh, absolutely. But from a psychological standpoint, it was arguably the exact intervention Danson needed right then.
Really? Just laughing at him.
Yeah, because if Burrows had coddled him, if he had said, "Oh, Ted, it's okay, let's talk through your feelings," it would have validated the anxiety. It would have told his brain that there was a real crisis to manage.
Oh, I see. So by laughing, he's basically saying, your fear is so unfounded that it's comical.
Exactly. It's a classic trial by fire. And this phenomenon of high performers just freezing up when they land the big role, it's surprisingly common.
It reminds me of Lisa Kudrow during the early days of Friends. I was reading a piece where she actually talked to Ted Danson about this exact feeling.
Right. Kudrow admitted it took her almost 2 full seasons to really get how to play Phoebe Buffy. She felt the lines were so illogical that she was constantly overthinking everything.
Working herself into a daily panic, thinking she was failing.
Yeah, and it wasn't until Matt LeBlanc essentially gave her a metaphorical slap and said, "You know who the character is now? You don't need to do the work you did."
That makes total sense. Sometimes you just need an external force to snap you out of your own head.
Definitely.
It's like getting a massive promotion to fly a 747 when you've only ever played Microsoft Flight Simulator. You get the uniform, you sit in the cockpit, but every time you touch a button, you're terrified someone is going to walk in and realize you shouldn't even be on the tarmac.
You're just waiting for security to escort you out. That is the perfect way to describe imposter syndrome.
And doing that in front of 30 million people every week. Insane. But that quiet, behind-the-scenes insecurity soon boiled over into real behind-the-scenes chaos.
It really did.
And wait till you hear what happened when they took a boat into a literal hurricane.
The Cheers set was a total pressure cooker. And extreme pressure does very strange things to human behavior.
Let's talk about the tension with Kelsey Grammer, who played Frasier. Grammer was secretly dealing with his own massive internal struggles, deep self-loathing, self-doubt, and heavy drinking.
Right, and it highlights how differently people process stress. Danson was externalizing his anxiety, crying, lashing out. But Grammer was internalizing his, withdrawing into a really dark, isolated space.
And those two coping mechanisms collided hard.
Yeah.
Danson actually walked right up to Grammer and said, I'm kind of mad at you that sometimes you don't show up ready to go. Grammer just nodded and said, okay, I respect that. But that one brief interaction sparked a 30-year silence between them. 3 decades of not speaking.
It's a tragedy of timing, really. Grammer later said that maybe Danson was just protecting himself, stepping away from a friendship that felt like a liability.
Like he couldn't afford to be pulled down by someone else's undertow while trying to keep his own head above water.
Exactly. But there is a beautiful resolution here. Recently, Danson apologized on his podcast, saying he missed out on 30 years of friendship.
And Grammer's response was amazing. He just said, my love for you has always been as easy as the sunrise.
As easy as the sunrise, it just goes to show the foundational respect was always there. It just took 30 years of emotional maturity to bridge the gap.
But long before that maturity, Danson was acting out in incredibly dangerous ways. Which brings us to the main event of his escapism, the boat trip.
Oh boy, this story.
It's pure cinematic chaos. Danson and Woody Harrelson decide to play hooky. They meet up in Marina del Rey at 8 in the morning with John Ratzenberger, who owned a boat.
Meanwhile, Jimmy Burrows realizes his male leads have all mysteriously called in sick on the same day, and he is absolutely furious.
Beyond furious. So they're on this boat, heading out, and Woody Harrelson asks Danson, you want to try some mushrooms?
And Danson had never done psychedelics before.
Never. So he just takes a giant fistful, and almost immediately after, they hit the tail end of an actual hurricane.
It is the literal definition of a perfect storm. Taking a massive, unmeasured dose of psychedelics for the first time while trapped on a boat in hurricane swells.
Wait, I have to pause here. He took a fistful of psychedelics during a hurricane? That doesn't sound like blowing off steam. That sounds like a literal death wish. What is the psychology there?
It goes back to the exhaustion of maintaining a perfect public facade. When you constantly feel like a fraud, the brain gets exhausted by the vigilance. It seeks out environments where a total loss of control is externally justified.
Wow. So if you're battling a hurricane while hallucinating, you don't have to worry about playing Sam Malone.
Exactly. The external chaos overpowers the internal anxiety.
That is wild. Danson said he genuinely thought he was going to die for 3 solid hours. George Wendt had to physically poke him every 60 seconds just to remind him to breathe.
And Woody Harrelson said Danson's face looked like it was actively melting.
Just a profound manifestation of extreme stress. If you're loving these Hollywood twists, make sure you're subscribed to our feed because we've got even crazier stories ahead.
Definitely hit that subscribe button.
But if the Cheers years were messy, what happened immediately after was a catastrophic collapse. Later in the deep dive, we'll talk about the shocking twist that cost him $30 million.
Right, because to understand this period, we have to look at the foundational trauma happening behind closed doors. Danson's second wife, Cassandra Coates, suffered a massive stroke during childbirth that left her paralyzed on one side.
Danson essentially paused his life to care for her. But that trauma created a deep rift. He later admitted they simply were no longer the same people they were before the injury.
The shift from equal partners to a caregiver-patient dynamic is notoriously devastating on marriages. It rewrites the psychological contract and breeds a lot of guilt and isolation.
And that fracture ended up being highly publicized. In 1992, he met Whoopi Goldberg on the set of Made in America, and they began an affair.
Which led to Coates filing for a divorce that resulted in a staggering $30 million settlement.
One of the most expensive celebrity divorces in history at the time. So Danson is navigating financial loss, the guilt of infidelity, and the glaring spotlight of a controversial relationship.
Which leads us directly into the 1993 Friars Club roast of Whoopi Goldberg.
And I want to be incredibly clear to you listening. We are not taking sides here. We are not editorializing the politics, and we aren't defending what happened. We are simply reporting the facts to understand the mechanics of this downfall.
Understood. The Friars Club roasts were historically boundary-pushing and offensive, but what occurred that night went far beyond typical roast humor.
Danson appeared on stage in full blackface. He delivered a routine filled with racial slurs and highly explicit jokes about his relationship with Goldberg. The backlash in the room was instant.
Prominent figures like former New York City Mayor David Dinkins were in stunned silence. Montel Williams actually walked out and formally resigned from the Friars Club.
Danson's rationale at the time was that he genuinely believed he had license. He was dating Whoopi. She reportedly encouraged the material, and he thought he was delivering this edgy satire on mixed relationships.
He thought he could run with the big boys of comedy.
But how does a person convince themselves they have that kind of license? How do you not have alarm bells ringing in your head?
It's the danger of the Hollywood echo chamber combined with immense privilege. When people insulate you from consequence and you're dating the subject of the satire, you develop a bubble mentality.
You think because she gets the joke, the world will get the joke.
Right, but satire requires a shared understanding of context, and the public did not share his context.
And the reality hit him fast. He noted that within 20 seconds of being on stage, he realized it was a total disaster. He said it felt like he had stuck his finger in a light socket.
And this is where the evolution of his accountability over the decades is really critical. For years, he defended his intentions. But now, 30 years later, his perspective has completely shifted.
He recently stated, point blank, your intentions do not matter. The impact you have on people is what matters.
He acknowledges the act was stupid and deeply hurtful and says he will apologize for it for the rest of his life.
I hear that, but it brings up a really complex dilemma. How do we, as a society, evaluate someone who makes a highly offensive public misstep, but actually commits to a lifetime of owning it without making excuses anymore?
It raises profound questions about public forgiveness. A single apology doesn't erase historical impact, and Danson recognizes that now. By saying he needs to apologize for the rest of his life, he is taking the emotional labor off the people he offended.
Placing it squarely on his own shoulders. He even said, I apologize again that I was arrogant enough to think I had something to offer. That is a heavy realization to carry.
It is.
Danson was, by his own admission, a complete hot mess during this era. He felt entirely incapable of being in a healthy relationship. So how does a person ever rebuild a life from that specific rock bottom?
You usually can't force a comeback from that state of mind. When you believe you're broken, you actively sabotage any attempt at happiness. True healing usually has to sneak up on you when you aren't looking.
And that's exactly what happened. Enter the canoe trip that changed everything.
The turning point.
The year's 1994, the dust from the scandal is settling, and Danson is cast in a movie called Pontiac Moon. This is where he meets Mary Steenburgen.
Now, Steenburgen was carrying her own heavy emotional luggage. A single mother of two, tough childhood, a father with severe illnesses. She was very familiar with trauma.
So you have these two incredibly damaged people arriving on set. Danson is actively telling himself, I'm not relationship material, I could ruin anything.
And Steenburgen is looking at Danson with all his tabloid baggage, thinking, this guy is way too complicated for me. They both literally said out loud, obviously, we cannot be in a relationship.
Which is the absolute perfect psychological setup for falling in love. They completely removed the pressure. They didn't have to perform.
The defensive walls were completely down.
And then comes the cinematic climax. A magical 4-hour canoe trip on the big river in Mendocino.
Just the two of them, left entirely alone to explore. No cameras, no audiences, no tabloids.
Danson said the experience was pure magic. By the time they paddled back, they were completely smitten. By 1995, just a little over a year later, they were married with the Clintons in attendance.
It is a staggering turnaround. And it really highlights the incredible human capacity for post-traumatic growth. Over the last 26-plus years, he's learned to channel his fear into something productive.
I read about this. He admits he still worries constantly that something bad might happen to Mary when she's not home. But instead of letting that paralyze him or taking psychedelics in a storm, he flips the script.
He turns the fear of loss into a trigger for profound gratitude. He stops and tells himself, aren't you lucky that you have someone you love so deeply that the thought of losing them terrifies you?
That is a massive psychological leap from the man weeping behind the drapes. He said recently, if I were to die, I can say I know what it's like to be loved and to love.
What a final destination for a guy who was spiraling so far out of control.
So let's synthesize this journey. When you, the listener, look at a polished, celebrated icon, remember the invisible storms, the spectacular failures, and private panic attacks they had to survive just to stand under those bright lights.
It really makes you wonder about the cultural environment we've built today. If Danson's worst, most public mistakes didn't have to dictate his final chapter, what does that mean for how quickly we rush to write people off now?
That is a powerful question. In an era of instant condemnation, are we inadvertently destroying the societal curtains that people need to hide behind, cry, and eventually grow from?
Are we leaving room for the canoe trip that changes everything?
Man, something to really mull over. You've been listening to this deep dive where we uncover the stories shaping Hollywood, music, and pop culture. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that keep the stars shining.